Bueno, 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 bueno. A ver si descargo la adrenalina de antes, que me hacen pasar de una pantalla a otra aquí como si uno fuera extropiano ya profesional y sigo siendo humano. Hi Phil, how are you?
Muy bueno.
Oh yeah.
Are you gonna jump in and do the whole panel in Spanish, or should we?
No, no.
I'm just kidding.
Estudio español en escuela, but se me olvidó mi español.
Me pasa lo mismo con el inglés. We have many questions for you about the beginning in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go to the beginning. Easy. How did you start it in cryptography, and what attracted you about it?
Well, I was interested in cryptography when I was a kid, when I was, I guess, maybe 10 years old. Of course, that's not serious cryptography, that's just children's. I read a children's book called Codes and Secret Writing, and I thought it was really cool. You know, you could write things that nobody else can read except somebody who knows how to reverse it, and I just thought that was so cool. But that was just when I was a kid. When I got to the university, when I first started playing with computers at the university, I wrote a program to encrypt things. And I thought it was very clever because people, software engineers think that if that's all they know, they think that cryptography is easy. You just write a program that appears to scramble information and you think you're finished. But my encryption software, one of the first programs I wrote was, do I have to talk louder or move the microphone down? Oh yes, I see.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for telling me that. Yeah. It turned out that it just added random numbers to the message, and then you subtract the random numbers from the message at the other end. The problem is that random number generators on computers are, actually pseudo-random number generators, and they're more pseudo than random. They're not very random. And so, but I didn't realize this. I just thought it was so cool that I could do this. But as you get deeper into it, you discover that the field of cryptography is driven by an arms race that's been going on for centuries. And if you keep track of what happens at each level of that arms race, you can keep up with it. But if you come in from outside without previous experience, you don't know what you're doing. And I certainly didn't know what I was doing then.
I feel like you discovered pretty early on one of the things that software engineers kind of like face if you're somewhat related to cryptography at any point. That is, don't invent your own cryptography. Don't invent your own cryptography. But you did it anyway, right?
Oh yeah. Now I know to tell people don't do that.
Yeah.
But I was young and stupid,
right.
And I didn't know that.
I would say I'm clever too, but okay.
Yeah. Well, I was a good software engineer, but I thought that also meant that I could be a good cryptographer. But that's just not true.
Well, I think history will may not agree with that statement, but okay, that's fine.
Yeah. When I developed my own block cipher for PGP 1.0, and then I went to the IACR crypto conference. By the way, crypto means cryptography.
Yes.
It does not mean cryptocurrency.
I'm 100% with you.
Yeah. I have a sticker on the back of my laptop that says crypto means cryptography. I have a whole bunch of those stickers. I should have brought them here, but
I think you're within the right crowd.
Yeah,
for
yeah.
That statement, so yeah.
All the people that developed cryptocurrencies, they all know that crypto means cryptography. But anyway, I went to an academic crypto conference in Santa Barbara right after I published PGP 1.0, and I had someone who was very experienced in cryptanalysis look at it, and it took me a very long time to develop this, and he broke it in about 10 minutes. And of those 10 minutes, 8 minutes was me explaining to him how it works.
Yeah.
So then in the remaining 2 minutes of that time window, he broke it. So that's how I knew that I'll never be a real cryptographer.
So it was 2 minutes of breaking it and 8 minutes of like negation of no, that's not broken.
Yeah, yeah. So realizing that I'm not a cryptographer, this made me a much better cryptographer. And so I never again tried to develop my own block cipher, but I did become pretty good at developing protocols, which are comprised of these building blocks like block ciphers or public key algorithms or hash functions. And so that's what I did with PGP.
Okay, thank you. Now let's go to your most famous project, PGP.
Could you talk louder?
Yeah, thanks. Oh, yeah, mejor, no? Okay, in the early 90s, you created PGP. Can you share with us the main reason why did you do it?
Well, my motivation at that time was I looked at it as a human rights tool because I was a bit of a peace activist in the 1980s, trying to stop the arms race. And I was also in some adjacent political activism like human rights work. And I thought that people who live in countries that had oppressive autocrats are in danger from their own government, and they need protection for their communications. So PGP was an effort to give them that protection. And then when I published it, it spread all around the world, and I wanted it to spread all around the world, but I had to pretend that it was only for domestic use, because soon after that, I was the target of a criminal investigation for violating U.S. arms export control laws. And so and I was still doing public speaking about it, and I had to pretend while I was publicly speaking that, oh yeah, this is only for U.S. citizens to use inside the U.S., and not acknowledge that it was for human rights abuses around the world.
I mean, Alfre is like much more of a historian than I am. Like, I always get all the dates wrong. But I always wonder, did you publish PGP when the act was already public, or the act was
when
the Export Act was already in place, or they put
Oh
in
yeah,
place
the Arms Export Control Act was in place for many years before that.
76. I'm 76. We use Bitcoin, and we are Bitcoiners, you know, and we have a special interest in your relationship with Alfre, and Alfre recorded a home video when he was diagnosed with ALS. In the video, he explained that when he started in cryptography, he met you on internet, and you had just made PGP, and tells how he then starting with you in the night, written code to the...
Yeah, that's right. He was one of the first volunteers to help work on PGP version 2.0.
Do you remember when you met?
You know, I spoke with him on the phone for a long time before meeting him face to face, because I was living in Colorado, in Boulder, Colorado. He was living in Southern California, in Santa Barbara. And so, you know, all of our conversations were by phone for a long time. I finally met him when I went to, I think it was when I went to my first IACR crypto conference in Santa Barbara, which is where he lived.
And how it was the organization between you and and him the first weeks in the work to make PGP?
In the first weeks that we just started talking on the phone because he wanted to help. Lots of people volunteered, but there were 3 people in particular that spent quite a lot of time on the project. And okay, whoop.
Hello, hello. Un, dos, oh.
Okay, does this work? Can people hear me now? Okay. So let's see. Yeah, I gotta speak close to the mic. Okay. So there were 3 volunteers. One was Peter Gutman, who was a PhD student in New Zealand. Another was Hal Finney, of course, and another guy in the Netherlands, Branko Lancaster. These were the 3 main volunteers, and then there were other volunteers who worked on porting it to other platforms and translating it into quite a few foreign languages. We just started in English, and when I first developed version 1.0 of PGP, I ran out of time. I missed 5 mortgage payments and was about to lose my house because I was spending all my time not making money. I was working on PGP. So I had to release it before the trust model was working. I knew what the trust model had to be. I thought of how to do the trust model before I began writing anything, but I just didn't have time to put it in. And so PGP 1.0 didn't have anything like a trust model. But Hal Finney, he said, okay, what would be the most effective thing for me to do? And I said, well, I really would like this trust model implemented. So could you do that? Here's how it works. Please write the code. And he did. And he, made some improvements also.
Can I ask why him? I mean, you have many volunteers to do it. Why you end up picking him?
Why what?
Why did you end up picking Hal and not anyone else?
Well, Hal was, very, very talented software engineer. Peter Gutman was on the other side of the world in New Zealand,
Right.
and Branko was in Europe, and then there were other volunteers in Europe, so there was a lot of time zones. But Hal was in the same time, almost the same. He was 1 hour earlier.
It was basically more convenient to be
Yeah, it was easier to reach him, and he was a very smart software engineer. Back in those days, I used to be a software engineer, and the pressures of PGP developing and turning into a legal battle took me away from writing code. And so I haven't written any code since 1995. But Hal continued working as a software engineer all the way through his career.
About PGP, when PGP was launched, you faced 2 important conflicts. On the one hand, with the state for the prohibition of export cryptography, and another hand with RSA data security, with the license. Can you share with us the main uses about these 2 conflicts?
Well, these 2 conflicts made it difficult to do anything with PGP. The export controls made it difficult to export, And the RSA patent was a US domestic patent. It didn't apply to other parts of the world. So that was stifling it in the US. And so I had to but I thought this was too important to allow these obstacles to stop it. So, you know, it had already been exported because you can't publish something on the internet without it spreading everywhere. And I wasn't charging any money for it, so I figured out maybe I'll be safe from the patent. And that turned out not to be the case. It turned out that when the criminal investigation began, I discovered that that it was RSA, the CEO of RSA, who had contacted the Justice Department and asked them to put me in prison. And so later on, I talked to one of their employees at RSA, and I said, "Why did you guys do that? Couldn't you have just sued me for patent infringement?" And they said, "Well, you know, it's not good business to sue a folk hero. It's better if we blame the government, and if the government tries to put you in prison, that's not our fault. Don't look at us, we had nothing to do with it." But you know, it really, although their concerns were intellectual property issues about the patent, the investigation was about violation of the Arms Export Control Act.
It feels like so hypocrite to like allegedly be fighting for the same fight, right? Like encryption, or like, you know, like being able to transmit data in a private way. But now you're using my block cipher, so I'm gonna sue you because, you know.
Yeah. But it turned out that these legal controversies made PGP more popular. And so I don't think that was the intended goal of both the Justice Department and RSA. You know, neither of them wanted PGP to become more popular, but that's what happened.
If you don't mind sharing, like, feel free not to answer, but like, do you mind me asking how did you feel like when like the whole investigation began? Like you were like put on the spot for doing something that you felt that it was like the right thing to do.
I was really terrified. You know, I was afraid that my family would be homeless. If I went to prison, then they would be, you know, they'd be living on the streets. They would have no money. And I had small children, you know, and so I was very worried about my family.
But despite all that, before the charges were dropped, you ended up like publishing the source code like in a book, being like,
yeah,
this is what it is. It's available for everyone.
Yeah, that was an interesting story. So I went to a conference, the Computers, Freedom, and Privacy Conference in San Francisco. And at that conference, I ran into Bob Pryor, who was an editor for MIT Press. MIT Press is an academic press. They publish computer science books. And so Bob Pryor approached me and he said that he wanted to publish my PGP User's Guide through MIT Press. And I said, well, I got an idea. How about if you publish 2 books? The one that you asked for, the PGP User's Guide, but another book also. And the other book, I want to have all the source code to PGP in that book. Because I knew that the export control laws in the US did not apply to books. You know?
That's genius.
Yeah. And there was a guy who worked for Qualcomm, a guy named Phil Karn. So Phil Karn had already done something along these lines. Phil Karn he did a very clever thing against the export control laws. He went down to the local bookstore and purchased a copy of Bruce Schneier's book, Applied Cryptography. I mean, he didn't know Bruce Schneier, he just bought a book at the bookstore, you know. And then he filled out a form asking the State Department for permission to export this book. And it was called a commodities jurisdiction. It means that you know, to make this book under the control of the Commerce Department instead of the State Department. And so they looked at it at the State Department and said, of course you know, why are you asking such a stupid question? We don't have any laws prohibiting exporting books. Why are you bothering us with this? And so they granted him permission to export the book. So then, that's when he sprung his trap, because he had a floppy disk with the source code that was in the appendix of this book. The source code was for the federal data encryption standard. It was just some subroutines to implement that. And it was on a floppy disk. It was the same code that was in the book, exactly the same. And he sent another request to the State Department with the floppy disk, asking the same question. I'd like to export this floppy disk, please. And they said, no, you can't do that. That's software. You can't export encryption software. We're not going to let you do that. And he said, well, why not? You just said yes to the book, and this is the same software, except it's not on paper, it's on a floppy disk. And in fact, it's not even the whole book, it's just a little part of the book, And they said no. They were talking to NSA, and NSA said no, tell them no. And so I knew that, Phil Karn appealed this and through several levels of appeals, administrative appeals. They kept saying no, so then he sued them in federal court. So when he was suing them, the State Department, in federal court, that's when I was approached by MIT Press, who said, we'd like to publish the PGP User's Guide, which is, actually, there was something very distinctive about the PGP User's Guide. It was written in first person singular. Now, not many computer manuals are written in first person singular. And the reason why I did that is because I could speak to the reader in my own voice. And that made people trust it more. And trust is really, really important for encryption software. And so they wanted to publish this. And I said, okay, but let's put the source code to PGP in a book. It was like 800 pages of source code. Had everything. It even had the make files in it. And so they published these two books, and MIT Press asked permission from the State Department to export the book. And the State Department recognized that they'd already fallen for that trap once with Phil Karn. They're not going to fall for it again. They asked the NSA what to do, and the NSA said, whatever you do, don't say yes. And so they didn't reply. But MIT Press didn't wait. They immediately started exporting the book to their overseas resellers. And our plan, my defense team, my lawyers, were planning to use this at trial if I was indicted. And we didn't really care what the State Department said. If they said yes, we could use that as part of my defense. If they said no, we could also use that because it's a First Amendment thing. So anyway, that, so that was part of the back and forth struggle that we were going through.
And to 93, from 93 to 96, when you were under investigation, do you feel the support of the community and security community, hackers or California?
Yeah, everybody was
not?
Sympathetic. I mean, it was in the press all the time. I was doing about 5 press interviews a week. I wore a suit all the time. Which I had to ask my legal defense team if I could talk to the press. And their normal criminal defense lawyer never wants his client to talk to the press. It's very dangerous. But I managed to persuade them that it would be better if I did, because this is a big public policy issue.
I like so much, you always smile in the photos.
Well,
almost the public photos.
Yeah, well, most people try to smile when there's a camera, right?
About the community, specifically about the cypherpunk, what do you want share with us about this group? You
well,
have
the cypherpunks were based in Silicon Valley and the San Francisco Bay Area. I was living in Colorado, so I was very far away from them. And I was also far away in cultural terms, because they were libertarians and anarchists, and I was not. I never have been a libertarian. And they were younger and more defiant, shaking their fist at the man, And I was more like, I wanted to work within the system to change the laws. And also I had children. And I had to protect my children. And one of the cypherpunks criticized me for not being sufficiently confrontational with the government. And I thought, my God, what is that? I mean, the guy who criticized me for that, he had no children.
But despite
if you have children, you really, your priorities are to protect your family, not to, to be the defiant, young male with high testosterone that, doesn't have to defend his family. I mean, we all need testosterone. That's nothing wrong with that. But I'm talking about the defiance,
But
at the end of the investigation, when the feds finally dropped the case against me, I did a photo shoot. I actually have the photo on my website. This is my website here. And on the photo page, there's a picture of me wearing a black leather jacket. But it wasn't my jacket, it was supplied by the photographer.
I want to say that despite that, they ended up embracing your software, because even though you may have different political or sociological views, the tool itself was helpful for both what you were trying to achieve and what they were trying to achieve, right? So
the what?
PGP was helpful to both their cause and your cause, right? So I feel even if you had different political views or you were not being a revolutionary, they could see the benefit.
Well,
of
it is inherently a political technology, and I knew that, and I wrote about that in the PGP Users Guide. There was at the beginning of the PGP Users Guide was this manifesto that I wrote about why we need strong cryptography, and governments had developed this attitude of wanting to control that went back to World War II. Because remember, at Bletchley Park, they had thousands of people led by Alan Turing who were breaking the German Enigma, they were breaking Japanese codes, and it was a successful project. It shortened the war by probably 2 years and probably saved a couple million lives. So the ability to break the cryptography of your enemy was super important for the outcome of World War II. And so, the U.S. and the UK they developed these attitudes about cryptography, heavily influenced by the experience of winning the war by having successful cryptanalysis, which depended on weaknesses of their enemies' crypto systems. And oh my goodness, we only have a minute. I'm wasting too much time on that. But they developed that attitude then. But you fast forward to the 1990s, they didn't want anybody to export strong cryptography. But by the 1990s, the internet was here. And it was time to change the laws. And that's what it took us a whole decade to struggle with them to get rid of the export controls in the US. The FBI attempted to impose domestic controls, but that was unsuccessful. The French lifted their domestic controls. The British had a little bit of both. And in 2000, the US eliminated their export controls on strong cryptography. And ever since then, we find ubiquitous strong cryptography. It's everywhere. It's in VPNs, it's in web browsers, it's mail clients that talk to the web, to the mail server. It's disk encryption. It's everywhere you look, there's strong encryption. It's thoroughly entrenched in the information society. And I would have thought that maybe that was the end of it. But in recent years, there's been pushback from law enforcement saying, well, we don't really want people to use strong cryptography for end-to-end encryption. Well, it's been 24 years since since the laws changed. It's a little bit too late to say that now.
What's your feeling about that these days, right? We are what we are right now, and we are used to using all this, but there's a lot of pushback as you're mentioning. How do you see this playing out? What do you think the end game for this is? Do you think that what do you think the end game for this is? Do you think that the government?
Well, I think that while there has been an attempt to push back against it in some mostly English-speaking countries, it hasn't led to a decisive policy. You know, there's been proposed legislation, but it never gets passed. So far, we've been able to resist this push. But, you know, it's kind of disappointing that we have to fight this 24 years later.
Thank you, Phil. It's a real pleasure for us. We have no time. Thank you for your time, for your patience, and to share with us all your information and the past of cryptography. Thank you for everything.
Yeah, and thank you for PGP too.
Okay. 0.